Welcome to Amazing Americans, your source for authentic stories of inspiration, where we highlight motivating and amazing achievements by your fellow Americans. Now, here's your host of Amazing Americans, Kate Delaney.
I'm so pleased to introduce you to Jim Agals. He's had such an interesting life, and he's dealing with something that a lot of people deal with when it comes to healthcare, and you have a spouse, and he finds himself in that situation with his wife who has Parkinson's. But he's had, like I said, such an interesting life where he started off, I'll say, in the working world as a paper boy. And I know what that's like because I deliver papers. And then it's funny because it led to the Paperboy Chronicles, which is a really fun book. And the stories in it are just flat out hilarious. And of course, we thank him for this, and he served in the military. So Jim, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Kate.
Let's talk about growing up. What was life like growing up?
You know, growing up for me, I have all fond memories, except when my mother and father were divorced. My mother was married 3 times, and we grew up in Queens, and she just kept marrying. You know, my father and her had 2 children, and then she married another fellow and we moved to Florida. And there was one child, my younger sister Jody, who was in the book. And then she divorced Joe, and she married a man named Arthur, and he had 4 children from a previous marriage, and they proceeded to have 6 more. So there was 12 of us all together. And Arthur was a milkman in Queens, and if he wasn't a milkman, I doubt that we would have had milk. So
wow.
It was an interesting thing. I was in the middle of the 12, so I got to see a lot of how life works and learn how to get along with people up and down the chain, so to speak. So that was interesting. And of course, we were poor. There was no all of the people that came back from the war, that got married, they had kids, and the kids were an addendum to the family. You know, they weren't doted on like today's children are, because they were dealing with their own issues. You know, they were either alcohol was prevalent in the war, and that's how they coped. It's still to a large degree, but they didn't have a definition for post-traumatic stress syndrome. Half of the guys came back with that, and they didn't even know it. So when children came along, they were brushed to the side, and you had to fend for yourself. So you made your own life, so to speak.
Yeah, and when you talk about that family, talk about having to deal with, I love how you said that you learned how to get along up and down the chain because of where you were, and talk about blended families. Now there's books about blended families and stepchildren and all of that. But you were one of the originals because you really had to deal with it on all kinds of levels, and even moving in the middle of that.
That's true. And the ethnicity of different things. My father was 100% Greek, and my stepfather, Arthur, was 100% Welsh. And so, you know, different
cultures
of looking at life, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about being a paper boy. What happened there?
Well, when I was 11 and a half, I decided that I'd like to try to earn money. Money was always tight in our family, and so you didn't have any. You didn't realize that you were poor because everyone around you was in the same circumstance. But I said, gee whiz, I'd like to try to earn my own money. And I got this paperboy route. I was a little bit young. You're supposed to be 12. I was 11, almost 12. And it was like the world opened up to me. I had my own money. My mom didn't say, hey, Jim, you need to contribute. I did help my mom, but I mean, it was $15 a week, but it was a world to me. I almost thought of writing a book titled Everything I Learned About Business, I Learned as a Paperboy. And when I think about it, it's so true. You learn that the customer is always right until the customer is not worthy of being a customer anymore. You know, you had to make those decisions, and you had to make sure that your booking was all together. You had to make sure your accounting was right. We paid for the papers on Monday. If you didn't collect, you're on the hook for the money. That was you. And so you're a real business person, and you had to make sure that you presented yourself correctly when you made your collections, that if the customer said, I don't want it on the stoop, I want it in my mailbox. Yes, sir, that's where you're going to get it, in the mailbox. So it was a great job in that respect, that you learned how to deal with people and how to satisfy their needs and what that meant to you. At the end of the week, you noticed it. Oh, wow. He gave me an extra $1 this week because I put it in his mailbox. Things like that. And of course, I became the station master, which is the guy that comes in earlier on Saturday nights and inserts all of the advertisements for Sunday papers, and in charge of making sure all of the routes get delivered. So if the route was open where there wasn't a paperboy to deliver it, I was the paperboy that delivered it. And we were in a area of Queens that was a dicey area in some areas, but not so bad in others. Right in Springfield Gardens, it was an area in transition. It was a white community going to a black community. And South Jamaica, we serviced South Jamaica, Queens. So I had to deliver some of those routes, and I had to learn how to get along. So it was really a lot of fun. I had to train new paper boys and learn how to control my money and how to, so it really set me up for success in the future.
Did you mostly do this on bike? Were you on bike when you delivered?
Oh, yeah, it was a bike. We were an afternoon route after school, but on Sunday mornings, people wanted their paper before 9 a.m. So 6 days a week, we delivered in the afternoon. And on Sunday mornings, it was an early morning delivery. I get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go to the press office and insert the papers on Saturday night. And we'd start delivering 6, 7 o'clock in the morning.
Wow. When you were put in charge of it, and at such a young age, you had to feel responsibility. It's, as you said, the things you learned from being in that business. How many people were you in charge of?
I guess we had 20, 25 paper boys in that franchise.
Wow.
I remember we had about 3,000 daily papers, and my route was 80 papers during the week and 120 on Sundays. Some people only received the press, as they do today. Some people only received the Times on Sunday. So usually you had a bigger route and the paper was bigger. So Sunday was a tough day,
It's interesting. Did you ever think it would come full circle and then you'd end up writing this book called The Paperboy Chronicles?
I never did actually think I'd write about it. I graduated college at age 75. I went back to school when I retired. My grandchildren were getting older. My daughters both have their master's degrees. One teaches physics, the other's a social worker in a school district. And my grandkids were getting old enough to think about Papa. Louise and I, my wife, we made sure that we were a very big part of our grandchildren's lives when they were younger. So as they grew and they understood the world, I didn't want them to think that Grandpa's a dummy, he doesn't have a college degree. And I wanted to challenge myself and see if I could do it. So I found UMASS at Amherst, a well-respected school, and they have a University Without Walls. And I went to school, and I graduated with a 3.67 GPA. And the last class I took was an optional class called creative writing. And that was the genesis for all my writing. I never thought I would be a writer because I was always a bad speller, and I'm still a terrible speller. But thankfully, somebody invented spell check.
When we come back with Jim Agals going back to school in your 70s and writing a book for tweens.
Stay tuned to Amazing Americans.